I was never superstitious. But the first night I slept in my new apartment, I learned some things just can't be explained. The building was old, and I lived on the top floor. Around midnight, I heard slow footsteps above me, but how was that possible? I was on the highest floor. Above me was only the roof. I told myself it was probably the wind or a stray cat, but the steps were steady, deliberate, and then they turned into the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor like a wooden chest. The next day, I asked the landlord if anyone had access to the roof. His face went pale. No, the roof's been locked for years. When I pressed, he brought the key, and we went up together. In the dust on the rooftop floor, there were footprints ending right above my bedroom, and next to them was the long drag mark of something heavy, like a chest or box, but there was no chest. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, I also heard a low, raspy voice whisper, "Open it." I left the apartment that night. To this day, no one has told me what that chest was or why its sound can still be heard. In 2012, a woman named Clara lived alone in a small Canadian town. One winter night, just before midnight, her home phone rang. When she answered, a low, crackling voice said, "Don't look out the window." Then the call ended. Confused, Clara walked toward the window to see what was going on. When she pulled the curtain aside, she saw a man standing in the middle of the street, staring directly at her, his face hidden in the darkness, but she could feel he was smiling. Terrified, she quickly shut the curtain and called the police. They told her they'd be there in a few minutes, but then the phone rang again. The same crackling voice said, "You told me to smile. Now I'm coming inside." When the police arrived, the street was empty, but in the fresh snow right outside her house, there were footprints leading straight to Clara's window, and no footprints leading away. In 2010, a young American couple, Laura and Michael, bought an old house in the state of Maine. The house was over 120 years old and stood in a secluded forested area. It was cheap because the previous owner had mysteriously vanished. On their first night, when everything was quiet, Laura noticed the walls were making noises. Not the creaks of old wood or the wind, but faint whispers, as if someone was speaking from inside the walls. Michael tried to reassure her, saying it was probably the pipes. The next day, they realized it was more serious. While working in the basement, Michael found muddy handprints on one of the wall's handprints that seemed to be coming from inside the wall outward. On the second night, the whispers grew clearer, now calling both Laura and Michael by name. Lights flickered, and doors opened and slammed shut on their own. Around midnight, Laura woke to see the bedroom wallpaper slowly bubbling, as if something behind it was breathing. Michael decided to find the source and cut open a section of the wall. Inside, he found a narrow, dark tunnel leading deep underground. A strong stench of rot came from it. He shined his flashlight inside, and for just a moment, saw multiple pairs of eyes staring back at him. The next morning, they left the house immediately. When the police investigated, they found the tunnel but reported it as empty. However, years later, officers admitted they could still hear whispers coming from that house. In 2003, at an old hotel on the outskirts of Chicago, there was a room the staff never went near, room number 6. Management never rented it out to guests, and the key was kept locked away in storage. Rumor had it that in the 1972nd, a gruesome murder had taken place there, and ever since, anyone who stayed in the room was never the same when they came out, if they came out at all. One night, Jim, who was in town for a business trip, found that every room in the hotel was booked except room 6. The hotel manager warned him multiple times not to take it, but Jim, who wasn't superstitious, insisted. The moment he entered, he noticed a strange smell like rusted iron mixed with dampness. The walls were cracked, and the ceiling light flickered constantly. Jim dropped his suitcase and went out for dinner, but when he returned, he found his bag in the middle of the room, unzipped, with clothes scattered all over the floor. He assumed housekeeping had made a mistake. Later that night, there was a soft knock at the door. When he opened it, no one was there. Minutes later, the knocking came again, louder this time. Irritated, Jim decided to ignore it and get some sleep. but as he glanced into the mirror, he saw a man with a blood-covered face standing behind him. He spun around. There was no one. Around midnight, Jim woke to hear whispering. The whispers were coming from inside the closet. When he opened it, there was nothing there, but in that instant, the main door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The light went out, and slow, heavy footsteps began moving toward the bed. Jim screamed, but the sound seemed to vanish into the air, as if the room swallowed it. The next morning, hotel staff found the room empty. Jim was gone. His belongings were still there, but there was no sign of him. Police found no evidence, and the case was marked as an unsolved disappearance. From that day on, room number 6 was locked again, and the staff say that sometimes, late at night, you can still hear the knocking and the whispers from behind the door.